Hello and welcome to 18 WJTS-Inform. It's Friday, and once again we are honored to have in the studio with us State Senator Mark Messmer as he comes in whenever legislation is meeting to kind of give us an update on what happened this past week. Senator, welcome to the show.
Great to be here as always.
Well, we've got 1 week left. That's next week.
Yep.
But there were some important things that happened this week that will carry into next week as well.
Correct.
And I'll let you kind of summarize this week.
All right. Well, this week we had 30 Senate bills that had been changed in the House that we put up for final vote in the Senate. And the budget bill and the road funding bill, the conference committees are getting down to the nitty-gritty on those items. We got our revenue forecast in on Wednesday. It was actually good news. We have a little over, I think, 109 million more projected for the this first year of the budget cycle, and about 80 million more the second year of that than what the revenue forecasts were in December. It's always good that they come in a little bit better than when they go down. So,
but that doesn't seem like a lot of money.
It's not a lot of money when you're talking about 31 billion total.
Okay.
You know, a couple hundred million, it doesn't hurt.
But it's better than the other way around.
Better than the other way around.
Okay.
Absolutely. Right. So those bills will now come to high speed, on reconciling the differences between the House and Senate versions. But the three of the bills that we dealt with that I call were a little bit more, they garnered a little bit more statewide press. One was a bill that we passed. It was Senate Bill 423 that dealt with sanctuary campuses. We have a prohibition in state law already against cities adopting sanctuary city or sanctuary town, policies. Okay. But there's been some stir, I guess, on our college campuses. And actually Notre Dame passed, I think, an official sanctuary campus policy. And basically what Senate Bill 423 says is if you receive, any state or federal, and usually the education grants, any type of state scholarships, okay. 21st Century Scholar, or things like that are state funded. If your school receives any of those, then you're prohibited from adopting a policy that officially says you're not going to cooperate with law enforcement. I mean, basically the same thing as our sanctuary city ban says applies to any colleges that take state funds.
Okay, and if they would, then they don't get the state funds.
Yep.
Okay,
that's pretty much it. So you can do what you want, but if you're going to intentionally break the law, then you're not going to get state funds.
Okay.
So that passed by a pretty wide margin in the House and Senate, and is now off to the governor's desk for signature. Another one that was a really good update to our parental notification laws. If a minor, it's Senate Bill 404, if a minor is seeking an abortion, prior to this, if a doctor or would be working with somebody under 17 that was seeking an abortion, there was no parental notification, or the opportunity to get a waiver from parental notification was pretty easy. Okay. They just had to basically apply for it. Now, if they're going to seek an abortion, if somebody is helping a young person, seek an abortion under 17, if they're going to seek a waiver, to not let the parents be notified, they have to have a reason why, and a judge can still grant them a waiver from notifying the parents, but it usually would have to be an issue where there's parental abuse involved in that. And then that was one part of it, to just firm up, that to allow parents to have the opportunity, to come in and testify, on allowing the minor to have an abortion or not. If they're under the age of 15, we're toughening up the notification requirements. If somebody comes in seeking an abortion under 15, they are mandated to file a notice to the Department of Child Services, and then they come in and do an investigation, because somebody is pregnant and they're 13, 14, 15 years old. There's
another problem.
Somebody's
there.
committed a
Yes.
felony somewhere,
yeah.
And so they need to have an investigation as to the details of how it happened. Failure to, and if you come in and falsely, try to say, hey, I'm the parent of this child, and I'm signing off that, if they're 15 and under, and you, or I guess anybody 17 or under, and you falsely claim to be the parent of that child, that's a level 6 felony for providing false identification.
Yeah.
If you're a medical staff or doctor who, doesn't comply with the laws, you have the possibility of having your medical license revoked. I guess if you failed to comply, but you did your due diligence, you may or may not get your medical license revoked. But if you break any of the provisions, especially the notice requirements or the parental consent, if you are involved in directly breaking those laws, you can have your license stripped. So really had strong bipartisan support. It wasn't unanimous, but had pretty good support in the House and Senate as well. So that one's off to the governor. And another one that seemed to garner a lot of statewide attention, but in reality doesn't affect only about 0.2% of the population, is the net metering bill. And that's if you have a solar system on your house. If you're currently a rural electric member, you're exempt, from this provision. If you're a city utility customer, you're exempt from this. Only if you're covered by a publicly traded utility company, Vectren, Duke, companies like that, which only covers about 800 customers out of about 3 million. Not very many. In those scenarios, and currently those are operating under the net metering policies, that temporary rules that were set up by the Indiana Utility Regulatory Commission, the IURC. They set up rules that said up until these publicly traded companies, when their customer base is less than 1%, they were allowed to set up rules to cover the what they call net metering. If I generate more than I need for my home, their rules say you get to sell it back at retail price to the electric company. And at the small fractions of customers that there are now, it's really not that big of a deal. But there's in states in the southern U.S. where the solar industry is much more prevalent, they've gotten 10 to 15% of their customers as solar customers. And when the utility company is buying back their excess power at full retail, what it ends up doing is causing the non-solar customers to have substantially higher rates to their utility bills. Just the way the utility costs are calculated. If they're paying 4 cents a kilowatt wholesale rate from the utility company, or they're paying 13 cents a kilowatt from the excess that's generated by the retail rate that's coming from the solar generators, when that percentage of solar customers gets, at a 10% solar customer base, that causes about a 17% shift in the electric rate for the non-solar customer.
Okay.
The utility company really doesn't get hurt by it either way, because whatever their cost of their power is, by them being a regulated, monopoly, which that's the way when power companies get an area, they're heavily regulated on what they can charge. They have to justify what their rates are, but they're guaranteed a minimum, recovery or minimum profit, on that, whatever the cost of that power is. So it's really relevant to the power company, but it hurts the non-solar customer.
So this is saying the rate would have to be lower if you sell it back.
Yeah. So Senate Bill 309, and it gave the current customers a 30-year grandfathering in of their current retail. So they said, we just invested, $20,000 on my system, and now the net metering program is going to go away, and I've got this money stuck in it, and I can't recoup my cost. And that's probably some of them it could be a financial setback. So anybody that's a current customer, whether it's a school, a business, an individual, for 30 years, they're covered under the current retail repurchase, because like I said, it's only 800 people out of 3 million in those publicly traded areas. So it's not significant. Anybody new and you have till the end of the year to put your system in to qualify for that 30-year grandfathering. So
Okay.
After that, starting next year, from January 1 on, for the next 5 years, anybody that puts them in will get 15 years of grandfathered retail. So we're given a pretty long window for anybody who's in now or wants to get in the short term. They'll have a 15-year grandfathering. Beyond that, which is a pretty long way down the road, and the current repurchase rate that we've got in the bill is after that all runs out. When the percentage of customers exceeds and we went to 1.5% of the overall customer base, then after that, if you're not grandfathered in, your repurchase rate will be 25% above wholesale.
Okay.
And so we're talking 10, 15, 20, 30 years down the road, there's going to be a limit at how much above wholesale they'll eventually be required to pay those solar customers. And with changes in solar technology, the cost of the installations keeps going down and more each year, and eventually the industry is going to have to stand on its own 2 feet. Because if you let the solar customers go at the current repurchase rate, eventually the people who don't have it are going to be the ones that get hit.
But this is really looking to the future.
Yeah.
Somewhere down the road, solar is going to become.
30 years, yeah. But as a cost, and we've heard the Elon Musk that's got solar panel technology, they're looking to make roof shingles out of solar panels, and that'll continue to drive the cost down. So as technology keeps improving, costs keep going down, that repurchase rate should become less and less of an issue. Ideally you'd want it to be within 5 to 7 years, maybe 10 years, a person could recoup their money back just on utility savings without being subsidized. That's really where the industry needs to go. And that was Senate Bill 309, and it passed, also by a pretty large margin. So those were some of the more high-profile issues. A lot of other bills were, just cleanup bills and things that would probably bore people to death. But the other 2 big issues, that said the budget, we did have a good updated forecast. At least when the dollars go up, that final budget negotiation becomes pretty quick, because I'm sure how the House and Senate negotiators both had, if there's more money, plans of where they thought prioritization would be to tuck it in. I'm sure on the Senate side, our primary objective is going to put additional money that came in to K-12 education spending. We had 1.5%, 2% increases built into our initial budget work that we did, and we finished up in early April. Now that there's a little extra money, we'd like to see that extra. It's not we're talking fractions of a percent anyway, but we'd like to see that allocated to K-12 funding as our primary. There'll be $500,000 here, $1 million. There'll be other things that I'm sure the House and Senate both had lists of, if there's extra, here's where we'd like to put it. If there's not, here's where we're going to cut it. And now that final negotiations will take place. And then the final bill that we'll be wrapping up on the budgets are main requirement. Second biggest issue that everybody's been talking about is road funding. In House Bill 1002, we had slightly different versions in the House and Senate. Not really big differences on the totals. The biggest difference, the House had a little bit more priority to how much of the extra fuel tax that we raise, how much extra will go to the city and town and county local funding, and how much goes to the state. They had about $300 million more. We had about $100 million more, in that mix. And my guess is the difference will be somewhere between the two. But they both put their priorities in slightly different allocations. That's pretty much it on that. Is what's going to be in the final mix. We had hybrid cars in our mix. They did not. We've got some future tolling of new interstates in our mix. They did not. Where those fall out in the final analysis. I mean, but that one's probably not as much work to get pulled together as the budget.
Does the House version have a cigarette tax?
It did.
As part of it, and Senate did not.
And
you said it did?
The House version had a cigarette tax in it because they were taking all of the sales tax on fuel and putting all of that into the road mix, which left about a $350 million hole in the budget. And to fill that hole, they passed a cigarette tax.
Okay.
There may be a time where the cigarette tax comes into discussion as far as, and I think the governor was really more inclined to support the Senate version without the cigarette tax in it. At some point, if it, from the federal level, if they change Medicaid rules, if they change, how those dollars come back to the state, we're anticipating when those changes happen in years to come, we're going to be looking at about a $500 million extra cost for the state to pick up. Kind of what we're hearing from our congressional leaders at this point is expect some changes and expect them to cost you money. But more flexibility along with that, which, so we don't want to do adjusting to the cigarette tax now, to fill a gap in the road funding process, when there might be a year or two down the road, we're looking at a big increase in Medicaid costs. And I mean, I think there's some justification to raising the cigarette tax, from it will reduce some consumption, which is, in the net a positive thing. And there's healthcare costs associated with smoking. But if we're going to do something to deal with, cigarette tax, it really needs to be when we have an issue to deal with that requires, more money on the Medicaid and insurance spending.
So it's out then?
It's out.
So
I expect
the House pulled it out.
Yeah. Well, that's part of this
still negotiating. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So it was not actually in the road funding bill, but it was in the budget to fill the hole in the road funding bill. I mean, it was kind of a two-part process. So I would expect we will not do probably the full sales tax allocation the way they had it, and not do the cigarette tax at some point in years to come when we see what Congress does to the Medicaid costs to the state, then deal with a cigarette tax when it's specifically to cover, medical expenses at a time when it makes more sense to do.
Okay. Well, Senator, thank you very much for coming in.
You're very welcome.
Busy week this week, but one more week that's
It'll be
a
really
little more
busy
busy.
yeah.
Trying to get everything wrapped up and done before the end of the week.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you very much for coming in.
Great to
Look
be
forward
here.
to seeing you next week.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching WJTS Inform. And once again, we want to thank our guest, State Senator Mark Messmer. Thanks for joining us. Have a good day.